Welcome to our channel, Crime-Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. Stephen John Port was born on 22nd February 1975 in Southend-on-Sea, Essex, and grew up in a quiet, working-class family. Those who knew him as a child described him as shy, withdrawn, and socially awkward. Teachers remembered a quiet boy who rarely spoke in class and seemed isolated from his peers. After leaving school, Port studied catering at college and later found employment as a chef. By his late 30s, he was living alone in a small flat on Cook Street in Barking, East London, where he worked as a cook at a nearby bus depot. Neighbors regarded him as odd, but not threatening. A man who kept largely to himself, but would sometimes offer help to others in the building. Privately, Port led a life of deception and growing obsession. Through dating and hookup apps such as Grindr, FitLads, and Hornet, he presented himself as younger and more confident than he was. Online, he fabricated details about his background and work, claiming to be a successful escort or a trained chef with an active social life. Behind the screen, he was lonely, isolated, and increasingly dependent on sex and control for validation. Around this time, he began using and supplying drugs commonly associated with the chemsex scene, especially GHB, gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a powerful sedative capable of inducing euphoria, confusion, or complete unconsciousness. Port used the drug for his own pleasure, but soon discovered its potential to dominate and incapacitate others. On 19th of June 2014, the body of 23-year-old Anthony Walgate was discovered outside the communal doorway of Port's building in Barking. Walgate, a fashion student from Hull studying in London, occasionally worked as an escort. He had arranged to meet Port after receiving an offer of paid sex through an online service. In the early hours of the morning, Port called emergency services, claiming that he had found a man collapsed outside his flat. He told police he did not know the individual and had merely come across him while returning home. When officers arrived, they found Walgate dead. Toxicology later revealed GHB in his system, but investigators accepted Port's account that he had tried to help a stranger. In reality, Port had invited Walgate to his flat, drugged him with GHB, and killed him. Panicking when the victim lost consciousness, Port dragged his body outside to make the death appear accidental. The inconsistencies in his statement were not pursued. Police charged him only with perverting the course of justice for lying about how he met Walgate. He served a brief sentence of community service and returned to his life in Barking. The death of Anthony Walgate was officially recorded as non-suspicious. 2 months later, on 28th of August 2014, a dog walker discovered another body in St. Margaret's churchyard, a short distance from Port's home. The victim was 22-year-old Gabriel Kovari, a Slovakian national who had recently moved to London. Described by friends as kind, artistic, and intelligent, Kovari had come to the United Kingdom seeking opportunity and community. He met Port through mutual acquaintances and accepted an offer of temporary accommodation at his flat. Within weeks, he was dead. His body was found propped against a wall near the churchyard, and post-mortem examination revealed GHB as the cause of death. Once again, Port inserted himself into the investigation. He told police he had found the body while walking his dog and suggested that the young man had been a drug user. Officers accepted his story without challenge. No link was made between the deaths of Kovari and Walgate, despite similarities in geography, age, and cause. 3 weeks later, on 20th September 2014, another young man was found dead in the same churchyard. He was identified as 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth, a chef from Kent. Beside his body was a handwritten note purporting to be a suicide letter. It claimed that Daniel had accidentally killed Gabriel Kovari by giving him too much GHB and could not live with the guilt. The note was signed in Whitworth's name. To investigators, the discovery appeared to resolve both deaths. No handwriting analysis was conducted, and no forensic testing was carried out to verify authenticity. The police concluded that Daniel Whitworth had taken his own life after causing the accidental death of Kovari. The letter was a fabrication written by Port. He had staged the scene to deflect suspicion and relied on the assumption that police would not look deeper into the deaths of young gay men found with traces of drugs. The ruse succeeded. For almost a year, the cases remained closed, and Port continued his predatory behavior without scrutiny. In September 2015, he struck again. His next victim was 25-year-old Jack Taylor, a forklift driver from Dagenham. Taylor was known for his kindness, reliability, and close relationship with his family. On the evening of 13th of September, he arranged to meet Port after chatting with him on Grindr. The next morning, Taylor's body was found near St. Margaret's churchyard, in almost the same location as the previous victims. Once more, the cause of death was GHB poisoning. When police informed Taylor's family, his sisters immediately expressed concern. They had read about the earlier deaths in Barking and noticed clear similarities. They questioned why 4 young gay men had been found dead within such a small area and under comparable circumstances. Their insistence prompted renewed scrutiny of the previous cases. At first, investigators dismissed the idea of a connection, suggesting coincidence or recreational drug use. But Taylor's family persisted, forcing police to review evidence and cross-reference data from the earlier deaths. The re-examination revealed striking consistencies. Digital records showed that Stephen Port had been in contact with several victims before their deaths. DNA analysis recovered traces of Port's genetic material on the victims' clothing and personal items. The police now faced the reality that the 4 deaths were linked and that a serial offender had been operating openly for more than a year. Port was arrested on 15th of October, 2015 and charged with murder, rape, sexual assault, and related drug offenses. A search of his flat uncovered syringes, bottles of GHB, and computers containing thousands of messages and videos. Digital forensics confirmed that he had used dating apps to target young men, offering companionship or paid sex before drugging them. Some of the recovered files showed victims rendered unconscious while Port assaulted them. Investigators identified additional men who had survived encounters with him but never reported the crimes, believing they had simply suffered bad experiences during consensual meetings. The trial of Stephen Port began in October 2016 at the Old Bailey. Prosecutors described him as a manipulative predator who exploited social media to deceive and dominate his victims. They detailed how he met each man, administered GHB, and staged scenes to appear accidental. The pattern was methodical and deliberate: lure, drug, assault, and dispose. Port denied murder, claiming the overdoses were accidents that occurred during consensual encounters, but the evidence contradicted him. Messages, videos, and witness testimony demonstrated a consistent pattern of coercion and deception. In November 2016, the jury found Port guilty of 4 murders, 4 rapes, and numerous other sexual offenses. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole, a whole life order ensuring he will spend the rest of his life in prison. After the conviction, attention turned to the failures that had allowed Port to continue killing. The Independent Office for Police Conduct launched a detailed investigation into the Metropolitan Police's handling of the case. It identified numerous missed opportunities. Officers failed to connect the victims, ignored witness statements, and neglected digital evidence that could have revealed Port's online interactions. Reports from residents and members of the local gay community who had seen Port acting suspiciously near the churchyard were not pursued. Even when similar deaths occurred within weeks and meters of each other, investigators treated each as an isolated incident. Critics argued that institutional bias played a role. Families of the victims and LGBTQ+ campaigners accused the Metropolitan Police of dismissing the deaths because the victims were gay men who used dating apps and recreational drugs. Officers, they said, had relied on stereotypes instead of evidence, assuming each case was an unfortunate overdose rather than a possible homicide pattern. Although the Independent Office for Police Conduct stopped short of declaring the failures institutionally homophobic, it concluded that the investigations fell well below professional standards. For the families of the victims, the findings confirmed what they had long suspected. Sarah Sack, Anthony Walgate's mother, and Donna and Jenny Taylor, Jack Taylor's sisters, became prominent campaigners for accountability. They had pressed the police to reopen the cases and had been repeatedly ignored. Their persistence was instrumental in exposing the truth. During public statements, they expressed grief not only for their loved ones, but for the opportunities lost to prevent further deaths. If authorities had recognized the pattern after the first or second victim, they argued, others might still be alive. In 2021, a coroner's inquest further examined the police response. The jury concluded that serious investigative failures had probably contributed to the deaths of the final 3 victims. The Metropolitan Police formally apologized, admitting that the original investigations were inadequate and promising reforms in training, record-keeping, and engagement with LGBTQ+ communities. The Stephen Port case had far-reaching implications. It exposed systemic weaknesses in how sudden deaths were investigated and how digital evidence was managed. It also underscored the dangers of online dating platforms when exploited by predatory individuals. Authorities began reviewing other unexplained deaths involving GHB to determine whether similar crimes had gone undetected. Public interest in the case remained strong. Documentaries, investigative reports, and dramatizations, including the 2022 BBC series 4 Lives, retold the events and highlighted the persistence of the victims' families. The dramatization focused on the families' efforts to secure justice, illustrating how ordinary citizens succeeded where official systems had failed. Each of Port's victims was more than a statistic. Anthony Walgate was an aspiring fashion designer with a bright future in London's creative scene. Gabriel Cavari was a multilingual young man exploring new beginnings in a foreign city. Daniel Whitworth was a talented chef who loved to cook for his friends, and Jack Taylor was a devoted brother and son whose warmth left lasting impressions on everyone who knew him. Their lives were cut short by a man who saw them as disposable, and by a system that failed to see their worth until it was too late. The case forced the Metropolitan Police and other law enforcement bodies to reevaluate investigative procedures, particularly in cases involving marginalized groups. Training on unconscious bias, better coordination between homicide and missing person teams, and the adoption of improved digital forensic practices were among the recommended reforms. Stephen Port remains imprisoned for life, his crimes standing as a stark warning of how easily modern technology can be manipulated for harm and how critical institutional vigilance is to protect vulnerable communities. The 4 men he murdered, Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor, have become symbols of both tragedy and change. Their families continue to advocate for reforms to ensure that what happened in Barking is never repeated. The Stephen Port case revealed not only the predatory cruelty of one man, but also the cost of systemic indifference. Through persistence and public pressure, the truth eventually emerged, but it came too late for those who lost their lives. The legacy of the case endures as a reminder that justice requires both diligence and empathy, and that every life, regardless of background or identity, deserves to be treated with equal seriousness and respect. Subscribe to Crime-Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.